Your Podcast, Bill.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Bill, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but did you listen to last week's episode? I already know the answer.
No, I did not.
I already know the answer to that. And you know what? I'm kind of glad you didn't because it was pretty hard without you.
Oh.
Really glad you're back, Bill.
Good to be back. Sorry that I was not here. It's been a crazy season.
Completely out of control. Everything. It's hard for me.
I am in the full throes of production season at my other job, so it's like every spare minute's like at home sleeping or at work working.
How's it going for you? Are you staying alive and
staying alive, just like the Bee Gees said.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, I'm glad you're back because it's not the same without you.
Yeah, I missed it. It's been we record a little bit ahead here too, some like during busy seasons. So how long has it been since I've been here?
3 or 4 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was it was before Thanksgiving.
It was before Thanksgiving. So it's been like a month.
And this is like the week of our Christmas episode.
Yeah. This is the week of our Christmas. This is
our special impeachment episode.
The special impeachment. You know what? I saw this meme that had Donald Trump on it and said, "Quit calling me orange. I'm peach." It's spelled IMPEACH.
Did you watch his rally in Battle Creek?
No, I didn't.
The wife and I tuned in for a few minutes on that, and he was talking about light bulbs and how he's changing up. Like, you know how everybody's trying to ban all the light bulbs. They tried banning all the incandescents in America, and he says we're bringing back the incandescents, so you have an option. Because I don't like these LED lights; they make me look orange.
Did everyone laugh?
Yeah,
that's hilarious. It's funny that you mentioned that because on those boxes when they first came out, it would say like 5 years, like they're good for 5 years.
Yep.
So I'd always keep the box, and like 3 months later they'd go out, and I didn't buy light bulbs for like a year and a half. Because they would go out, and I would take them back, and they would give me a fresh set. Oh,
brilliant.
Because they say 5 years, I'd save my receipt, I'd save the box, because I'm like, there's no way. There's no way this is lasting for 5 years. And I would keep it, and I would go back to Home Depot, and with my receipt, I'd say, look, this says 5 years. I bought it 6 months ago. I need a replacement, and they'd replace them.
Wow, I have not had any LEDs go bad in my house yet.
Really?
I got the Philips Hue, so I can program it all for my phone. And so the Big Brother knows when I'm coming and going.
Yeah.
But like my whole house is like all LED now. It's been that way for a couple of years, and I haven't had any outages.
Speaking of that, this is kind of funny. We haven't talked in a long time,
I know,
Bill. I've got so much to say to you, and I've got such a small amount of time. Did you see that family in Texas? They had like one of those Ring doorbells and stuff, and they hacked into their house.
No. That doesn't surprise me. Who bought Ring? Was it Amazon or Google?
I'm not sure, but someone had figured out, I don't know if it was Ring or another, like this guy travels a lot for work. So he installed some cameras in his house so he could like say hi to his daughter and things like that. Someone hacked it and said, hey, Rebecca, get your mom or whatever, and like, and then like the lady like turned off all the cameras and everything. And then they found her on social media via Facebook and was like, you just made a bad mistake, messaged her.
Wow. That's scary.
And she called the cops, obviously right away.
Yep.
And it's like, I don't like the smart stuff. I don't like the smart TV. I don't like and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm paranoid because we do talk about the
conspiracies and
Yeah, and like I don't like my bed,
You don't like your bed?
I don't like my bed. I don't like my...
I've got a smart bed.
Actually, I don't. Yeah, but that's a whole nother story. But I don't like my phone in my bedroom because I'm like, are you listening? Because they do listen to you.
Yep.
120,000%. There's no doubt. Whatever. There's
That was the first thing my wife changed when we got married was beds stay in the living room at nighttime.
The beds do?
Dang. Phones. So we sleep in the living room now.
Look, we're sleeping in the living room. Our phones deserve their own bedroom.
No, phones stay in the living room at bedtime.
Oh, wow. It's wild, man. It's wild.
There's a lot of EMFs that come off your
What's an EMF?
Electromagnetic frequency. It's
some people, I know what it is, but some other people may.
I'm asking for a friend.
I'm asking for a friend. What exactly is an EMF, Bill?
An EMF is an electromagnetic frequency. And that can come from wiring in your walls. That can come from anything that has electricity, like your computer has EMF, cameras have EMF, lighting, everything has an electromagnetic frequency to it.
Oh, wow.
Your phones emit higher, especially newer phones, emit higher amplitudes of EMF. You can get a Tesla meter, it's called. It's an app actually on the phone of all things, and it'll the compass in your phone will actually read how much electromagnetic frequency you have. So if you hit that on and you walk up to a wall, it'll like ding higher. If you take it to another phone, it's like tagging out.
Wow.
You know those new smart meters that consumers or your electric company puts on your house?
Yeah.
Those are just radiating with EMF. And that can like mess with your psyche. It can make you paranoid. It can make you nervous. It messes with your biology.
That's crazy.
I know. And if you decline the smart meters, they charge you extra and give you an old analog one that they have to come out and manually read like the old days.
So the last house I was in, we were renting, and we didn't have a choice. They just showed up one day and put it in.
Yeah. So I just found it at my house like a couple years ago. Like all of a sudden there's all these red LEDs glowing on the side of my house. They didn't even ask.
What'd you do? Did you call them or like, what the heck?
No, I just dealt with it. Yeah.
This is what it is.
It's not near the wall I sleep on, so I was cool with it. But
What gets me, though, is like, for instance, there was a certain president, Barack Obama, said that, you have your air
don't want to
conditioning.
name names, but it rhymes with your mama.
Yo mama, Obama. Yeah. You think you deserve to have your house at 72 degrees in the winter and 65 in the summer or whatever, And those electronic things, they could control the temperature in your house. They can. No, they can't. Oh, the Nest. Yeah. It's the Nest. You have one of those too, don't you?
I have the
How
Nest.
can a conspiracy theorist like you have all of these things?
I know. Well, Google just bought Nest.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a bummer because I don't like Google. But the way I figure it, like they already know how you're coming and going from your phones. This has been proven that like some of the
Oh, sure.
You accept all the terms of use when you start using a phone too. So Apple for us knows everything we're doing, and if you have a Gmail account, Google knows everything you're doing too. Even if you use Google Maps, so like you pretty much agree to let them spy on you through your location services on your phones. So yeah. And with a Nest, that's just like, okay, so they're going to know how warm I keep my house in the winter and how cool I keep it in the summer. But I don't have any cameras in my house because of that.
All right, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go out on a limb. This is a limb. Siri, for a while, was convinced I was gay.
What did you say to Siri to give her that impression?
Siri and or my phone. Well, what had happened was I had this article come up in my news feed that was related to something else. Like it was like some conspiracy or some political ad from The Blade or something, some gay like periodical, right? Well, I don't care if it's an interesting article, gay, straight, whatever. I read it. Well, all of a sudden I started getting like these hookup, like not hookup, but like what are those?
Did you subscribe to Grindr?
No. No, what is that? Like eHarmony, like there was a couple, for like 3 or 4 days, I kept getting these ads of like this gay stuff, and I'm like, I'm really nervous that Apple thinks I'm gay. I was like, and the thing is, it was a very well written article, and I didn't realize who it was from until I was done. I'm like, oh no, that was from like the Blade, and then the next thing I know, I start getting like gay ads. I'm like, oh great, that's great.
There's YouTube videos out there if you look at them or look for them of if you mention like. Okay, we don't have dogs. So if we were talking about dog food right now,
right, with
our phones out, and we're talking about different types of dog foods, and we're in front of a computer right now too. You can't see this on the camera or on a podcast, and we just start talking about dog foods. And now if you go to your browser and look up go to Fox News or something or anywhere, dog food ads are going to start appearing on the side.
Sure,
like some of the I don't even know.
Well, look at one of our sponsors, the. Manscaped. Yeah. That was, we were talking about it.
Yep. And then you opened up an article and there it was.
Yeah. Like we opened up an article. The next thing you know, it's like, oh, there it is.
Yep.
Right there. So I don't know. It's speaking of sponsors, Bill, how was Manscaped treating you?
I can't complain.
Like how often is this? What's the frequency of use? If you don't mind me asking, it's a little of a personal.
So today marks 2 months I've been married. So I used it just slightly before because that was when we got it in. And I don't have a lot of hair growth for whatever reason.
You're not a
I'm not a hairy man.
Not a hairy person.
I'm not a hairy man. A little bit of chest hair, a little bit on the back. So once a month use for me.
Okay.
But all the little treats they give along with it. They give it to us. I've been using that more. Like they have like a good body wash I've been using.
Does this smell pretty good and everything?
Yeah, it smells good. My wife likes it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate them. If you go to manscaped.com, 20% off when you type in remote, no pressure at checkout. I think, and you get free shipping.
Free shipping. Yeah, you can't beat that.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
They send you quite a little package.
They really a nice little package.
Yeah.
And then also we have Deli Fresh Design as well. Let me take a look. Ross sent over. Have you heard the copy that he sent over?
I believe I did last time we were over.
It's so good. Like he's probably like, you ding dongs. I can't trust you to just like.
You guys are insulting my company. You can't keep saying the stuff you're saying.
It's just not gonna work.
Don't put me in the same paragraph as.
Right, exactly. Let me see. Deli Fresh Design.
Now, for those not watching on the YouTube channel, he's on his phone.
I should have Googled this before.
All of these ads for dog food are popping up right now. What is going on with that?
Well, yeah, and
you don't even own a dog. What is that?
I don't own a dog. If you could choose a dog or you have cats.
I have cats.
Speaking of that, does your wife like cats?
She does.
Well,
she had a
good.
cat in one of her old places. Yeah.
Okay.
And she's adopted him. Pretty like taken to him. You know.
That's nice.
Yep.
Well, Deli Fresh Design makes outdoor gear that is simple, reliable, and sustainable. It recycles rock climbing rope, sailcloth, fishing waders, and other tough materials into essential products for enjoying the outdoors. All are made in Colorado. Type in RNP20 at checkout. You get 20% off and free shipping for orders over $75.
You can't go wrong.
Now, I think it's too late to get it by Christmas.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that brings in a new year like a nice gift.
That's right. Nothing says Happy New Year.
Like a nice, unique fishing gift.
Like a new sling bag.
Like a new sling pack. Yeah, 20% off when you type in RNP20 at checkout. Thank you very much. And like I've said before.
Or a good New Year koozie.
A good, yeah. How are you going to hold your beer on New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
Speaking of New Year's Eve, what are you doing for New Year's Eve, Bill?
Probably nothing.
Just hanging out? It's
just
such an odd holiday when you're old.
Well, you're old, and I don't drink anymore, so it's like I don't look forward to it like I used to. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, speaking of like you used to, it has nothing to do with like you used to, but in other news.
Go on.
Have you ever stolen anything, Bill?
Oh, yeah.
What'd you steal?
Oh, we're going back to third grade here.
Okay.
And a buddy broke into some random locker, and he found like $3 and a Simpsons Sing the Blues cassette tape.
The cassette tape, yeah.
And he gave me the cassette tape, and he kept the cash. And that racked my conscience for the entire summer.
Did you return the tape?
I swore I was going to hell.
Did you return
the tape? Oh, no, I
tape?
still got it probably. I had no idea whose locker it was.
Oh, okay. I stole, when I was a kid, my cousin, the Shepherds, came and visit us. And I walked up, it was in St. Augustine, Texas. I think I was probably 4 or 5, maybe. And I went up to the store. And I stole some strawberry candy. You know those little strawberry candies that your grandma used to have in like a candy thing?
Yep.
You know, and it's like they're so good. There's like kind of a
jelly in the middle.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
So I stole like just a couple and put them in my pocket, you know. And so we're walking home, and I don't think anything of it because I'm just a dumb kid, you know. And my mom saw me eating candy. She's like, "Where'd you get that candy?" And I was like, I got it at the store. I thought you just go get stuff. She goes, "Who paid for it?" And I'm like, I just put it in my pocket. What? So she made me go back, and it was a little harsh for a kid because I really didn't know. But she took me back to the store, and I had to apologize to the store owner, and like she paid, and she's like, he can come and sweep the floor for you tomorrow if you want, or do some work for you. And I was scared because I'm like just a little kid, and I'm like, what is like slave
Mom,
labor?
There's child labor laws.
Exactly. But the guy was like super nice, the guy that owned the store, and he's like, oh, that, you know, he probably didn't understand, you know, it's just a kid.
That's cool of him.
But
yeah.
After that, man, I was like rocked.
Scared straight.
Oh, I didn't know any better.
Yep.
But speaking of another news, man was arrested with homemade license plate written on a grocery sack in crayon.
Seems legit to me. Go on.
I mean, if I saw a car rolling down the road with a license plate written in crayon, I'm thinking,
if it was a clever plate, you know, I'd probably like it.
Seems legit. 20-year
out of state.
That's out of state.
Tourist.
That's a Kentucky plate. Apologies to all of our listeners in Kentucky. I know I'm going to get some
hate mail
on that one, but it's a Kentucky plate. No,
Jeff
but
T.
it actually wasn't in Kentucky, but It's actually in Pennsylvania, and we got lots of listeners in Pennsylvania, and I'm not going to offend them.
Nope.
Because we have no morons in Michigan at all.
No.
No morons here.
Depending on the side of the state or the part.
Yeah, we've got a great reputation, the east side of our state. Just kidding, you guys. God, it's going to be bad. 20-year-old Joshua Anthony Lewis Brown, 1, 2, 3, 4 names, was stopped on a Joshua Anthony Lewis Brown was stopped on a toll road in the Hoosier State, which is Indiana, I'm sorry, with a flat tire.
No, Hoosier. That's Ohio, isn't it? Maybe it's
Hoosier States. You ever see Hoosiers, the movie Hoosiers?
No. Oh, my goodness.
Are you kidding me? We're going to have you and your wife over. We're going to watch Hoosiers.
Movie night.
Hickory. Anyways, anyone who knows, Hickory don't crack. If you guys ever seen, anyway, I digress. 20-year-old Joshua Anthony Lewis Brown was stopped on a toll road in the Hoosier State with a flat tire. State troopers pulled over to help him out. However, they soon noticed he had a very unique custom, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm doing custom license plate. It was handwritten in crayon on a paper grocery sack. They ran the check. They ran the check on the vehicle using the VIN number and discovered that the car had been stolen out of State College, Pennsylvania the day prior.
Oh.
Excuse me. Troopers also found that Brown had never been licensed to operate a motor vehicle in any state and was currently on probation for grand larceny. He was arrested and charged with possession of stolen property, a level 5 felony, and operating without ever obtaining a license, a level C misdemeanor. What's the difference between a misdemeanor? Is that really bad? I know like a felony's the worst.
Misdemeanors aren't good, but misdemeanors are like traffic violations, like speeding kind of stuff. Felonies are the bad ones. Felonies, you lose your right to vote. Felonies, you lose your right to guns.
Oh, okay. According to the Indiana State Police, as reported by the authorities in Pennsylvania, it is alleged that the vehicle had been stolen when the owner left it unattended and unlocked with the engine running outside the car to keep it warm while he's in the local grocery store in Pennsylvania. That's not really what it says, but I was kind of fumbling, so I just made stuff up as I went.
This whole thing never happened.
This whole thing never happened.
Fake news.
Fake news. But when the owner made his quick purchase and left the store, he found that his vehicle was missing. Brown will be held on the Indiana charges and will face extradition back to Pennsylvania pending their local charges.
So my question is, do they ship the car back to Pennsylvania for the owner, or do they just say, like, sorry, come get it, or they got to hold it as evidence? Like, what's the deal with it? Like, so some dude's in Pennsylvania now without a car.
Yeah.
Renting, maybe, or riding his bike.
It's really funny that you say it because I had a friend of mine. He was an older guy. He's dead now. I've had a lot of older friends, but this guy's quite a bit older. In the 70s, he had a brand new El Camino car.
Those were cool cars.
Yeah, a car. But is it a truck?
Who knows?
Or is it a car? Anyway, so he had an El Camino, and it got stolen. Well, like in the late 90s, he got a call. We found your El Camino.
It was stolen in the 70s?
Yes.
Wow.
So like 20 years later, he gets a call. We found your El Camino. It was in Las Vegas or New Mexico, somewhere out west like that. And he had to actually go out and pick it up. And he's like, it's not worth it. Because, he got payment from his insurance company when it was stolen and everything. But he's like, by the time I go pick it up and all this other stuff. But he still had to figure out what he had to do with it because it was his car.
Did he have to pay back the insurance company?
I think there's like a statute of limitations or something. Like if you find it in the next 5 years. I don't know. I'm not an insurance salesman. I don't know.
I wonder. What shape was it in, I wonder, too?
I don't know, because I don't think he even took ownership. I think he sold it out there.
They kept it in good shape. I mean, it could be worth, what he paid for it in the 70s.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, an El Camino. That's a cool vehicle.
1970s, he probably paid $5,000.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe 10. I don't know.
You like to read, don't you?
Nope. I'll wait for the movie.
Are you serious? You're not a reader? I thought you were for some reason.
I am not.
Why did I think that you were a reader?
Leadership books for work. But
what you got to do. Well, this week's guest is an author, so...
How many movies? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Keith McCafferty is with us this week. Keith McCafferty is a survival and outdoor skills editor of Field and Stream, author of The Royal Wulff Murders, The Grey Ghost Murders, Dead Man's Fancy, Crazy Mountain. There's tons. There's tons of things in here. that he wrote. He's a world famous author.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. He's an awesome guest. It's funny because I called him and he starts talking because he's an older guy. So he starts talking to me, and I'm like, wait, we haven't even recorded yet. And he was like 20 minutes into his stories.
Oh, no.
But talking to him, he's like a storyteller. You could tell, like, this is his life. You know, like, like in this whole interview right now, you'll hear him, and he's going to tell you stories about the Hemingways. Like, he knew the Hemingway family.
Oh, wow.
And, like,
that's awesome.
Like, some really cool stuff with Field and Stream and all this other stuff. So it was a really fun interview to do, and it was really cool to talk to someone that was older, that had some experiences in his life, and just
of a different generation.
Yeah, just a really cool dude.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Well, today on the Remote No Pressure podcast, I am very excited to have Keith McCafferty join us. And Keith is an editor for Field and Stream, and author of a lot of books, including Royal Wulff Murders, The Grey Ghost. And he recently, you released one last year as well, correct? That's when your most recent one came out? Keith?
Death in Eden, yes.
Death in Eden came out, yeah. So you've won countless, a lot of awards, tons of awards. You've been on O Magazine's books you have to read over the summer, and I mean, there's a lot. But I think, talking to you before the show started, I mean, we've been talking for 25 minutes before we pressed the record button, Keith. I mean, there's such a depth of knowledge, and you're such a great storyteller. I don't think if I'm not mistaken, it's probably not the awards that drive you. It's your passion for the craft.
Yeah, I think it was a case where if I didn't do this, I'd always be sort of vaguely disappointed that I hadn't. And what happened was, when I was a child, or let's say a teenager, my goal in life was to become the fishing editor of Field and Stream.
Wow.
And Al McLean, the great A.J. McLean, was the editor at the time, and he was my hero. And so I had a plan. I had my life planned out. I was going to meet Al McLean. I wanted to impress him somehow and marry his daughter, who was a very beautiful young woman, and take his job as a fishing editor of Field and Stream. And by the time I started writing for Field and Stream, and we're going way back, like 38, 39, 40 years ago, Al McLean was the editor emeritus. He was sort of semi-retired. And I was just sort of starting out as a contributor. And everybody, all my colleagues at Field and Stream, they all knew that I idolized Al McLean. And so I got in touch with Al McLean. They put me in touch with him, and he invited me down to fish with him. In June, he would always rent a cabin on the bank of the Madison River near Ennis. And so I was thinking, how can I impress the great Al McLean? Well, he could do something very few people could do. He could take a 90-foot fly line and cast the entire length without a rod, just with his hands.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to learn how to do that. Because there can't be very many people in the world who can do that. And my dad gave me an old 8.5-foot carpet beater, an old fiberglass rod. And I'd practice with that thing every day, and I'd just start cutting it, just sawing it off. So pretty soon you're casting 90 feet of fly line with a 5-foot rod, and then a 4-foot rod. And you get down to about 15, 16 inches, and if you can cast the whole fly line with 15, 16 inches of rod, you can cast the whole fly line with just your bare hands. So it took me a long time to learn, but I did it. And I was excited to meet Al McLean. I'd corresponded with him a little bit, but I'd never met him. And he died.
Wow.
He died in December, I believe. And so I never I never met him. I never impressed him. I never married his daughter, and I never took his job as the editor, fishing editor of Field and Stream. But I will tell people, I came close. I've over the years written about 1,500 articles for Field and Stream magazine and counting. And I used to tell people it was like riding around the world on a broom. I flew around the world to fish and to write about it. One of the greatest trips I took was to India, fish for the great golden mahseer in the Himalayas. in the same place where Jim Corbett hunted man-eating tigers and wrote the book Man-Eaters of Kuman. So, that was sort of a charmed life there. But then they decided that they wanted me to be in the magazine every month. I mean, I was already in the magazine several times a month. I think if you look at the February 2008 issue, I have 8 articles.
Wow.
I had to write under a pseudonym. So people will ask me, how did you get the name Sean Stranahan for my protagonist, in my books? And I said, well, that's the name I used to write under. And
wow.
because in the day, back when, if I had more than 1 or 2 articles in Field and Stream or any other magazine, they'd want me to write the third under a pseudonym. So it didn't look like, the whole book was written, the whole magazine was written by one person. And so the first time I used it, I was in graduate school at the University of Michigan. I was in a master's class in journalism, and there was a writing contest, and you had to use a pseudonym so the judges wouldn't be biased by knowing somebody's name. So I wrote a story or a piece under the name Sean Stranahan, and I won. And my prize was to drive to upstate Michigan, spend the night with this guy who had put up money for the awards, and go hunt with him the next morning, hunt snowshoe rabbits on snowshoes with a basset hound.
Wow.
So that was my first, my first literary award. And I can still remember, just seeing that tail of the basset hound, because that's all you could see. The rest of them was buried by snow. I can't even remember if we shot a snowshoe rabbit. But years later, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to win the Western Writers of America Spur Award for Best Novel. Mm-hmm. And I had to, give a speech in front of all these big muckety-mucks, big authors like C.J. Box, Craig Johnson, and, a lot of people. And I thought, well, what am I going to say to these people? And I thought, well, I'm going to tell them the story of hunting with the basset hound, that the Spur Award, as great as it is only the second best literary prize I've ever won.
Now,
anyway,
one question for you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, eventually they made me into the Outdoor Skills and Survival editor. And that's actually how I got started writing the novels, in a sense. I always tell people I was Bear Grylls before there was Bear Grylls. They would have me dropped off on the top of a mountain in December and dressed, just like you are indoors, just with a shirt and pants, and see if I could survive for 3 nights or 4 nights. And so one time they did that, and they had I had a photographer part of it, and then he left. But I was supposed to survive the first night by crawling into a debris hut, which is basically just covering yourself with dirt and pine needles. And it's like 10 degrees out, and you don't sleep at all. You just get up and do push-ups and walk around. And anyway, I survived, and the next night I was able to use a tarp, and it was like 6 feet by 6 feet. And I could do anything I wanted with that tarp, but I couldn't start a fire. And then the third night, if I survived the second night, I would get to start a fire with a flint and stone like that, if I could, and build a shelter if I could, with what tools I had, which was basically a flint and a knife. But that second night, I was rolled up in that tarp, trying to keep some body heat in, and I had to pee. So I can remember kneeing to the edge of the tarp, figuring I'm going to pee into the snow. Anyway, I ended up peeing onto the tarp.
Oh no!
And I ended up. No, this is true. I ended up wrapping myself back in there, and I can remember thinking very distinctly that night, if I get out of this, if I ever get out of this alive, I'm going to write that novel that I always wanted to write because because I'm getting too old for this, and that's exactly what I did. I went home, and a few weeks later, probably, I started writing the Royal Wulff Murders.
Oh, wow. Now, I'm a big Steinbeck fan, and we talked a little bit about Hemingway earlier before we started recording, but question for you on Steinbeck. Your most recent title is A Death in Eden. East of Eden is my favorite Steinbeck book. Is any relation at all, or not really?
No, yes. Because I wanted, Steinbeck wrote one book which was his East of Eden, right?
Right. Yes, sir. Yep.
And that's the story of, two boys. What do you call those? Not the prodigal son, but
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel story.
Right,
so what I decided to do with A Death in Eden, which is written about Montana Smith River, was to write a story, a Cain and Abel story, about two young boys who grow up on either side of the river and who end up going up and being on either side of the controversy over whether a copper mine would be built in the headwaters of the river, threatening, the fishery. This is all true. This is all taken from truth. And the Smith is a wonderful river. It's maybe the third most coveted drawing in the country, next to the Grand Canyon and the River of No Return. It's 60 miles of near wilderness, and it's God's cathedral. It's just spectacular. And so that's what I wanted to do with that, was to sort of do a Cain and Abel story. And so that was a very satisfying book to write, but it was my brother's idea that I do it. And the interesting thing to me, one of the things how fact works its way into fiction and vice versa, is I envisioned this boy growing up on the river and ending up being the proponent of mining. Well, it's exactly what happened. The manager of the proposed copper mine there right now grew up on the banks of the river as a boy.
Wow!
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Wow.
And anyway.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things, I am a big Hemingway fan, and a lot of people may not know this, but the name of our podcast is Remote, No Pressure. There's remote, period, no pressure, period. And the reason I did that is I've read The Sun Also Rises a million times, and the have and the have-nots. I love Hemingway, and he has a lot of those sentences that are one-word sentences, and so that's part of the reason we have our name and the way it's structured.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So I love Hemingway, and you have quite a bit of history with Michigan and with
Hemingway,
with the Hemingway
and
family,
the Hemingway
as well.
family.
Yeah.
Not just that. Go ahead. But I'm supposed to speak at the Hemingway conference symposium next year.
Oh, wow.
In Cook City, and I just met a man who read The Sun Also Rises sitting on the porch of the cabin where Hemingway stayed during the 1930s. He's a ranch hand then. Anyway,
oh, wow.
But my own connection goes back quite a ways. I was sort of considered to be the Rocky Mountain editor of Field and Stream, and Jack Hemingway, Ernest's oldest son, was the Pacific Northwest editor. The difference, besides geography, is that I actually wrote stories, and, like 1,500 or so, and I don't know if Jack ever wrote anything, but they wanted that Hemingway name in there. And Jack was a real steelhead bum, and as I say, I was I was a wannabe steelhead bum who wanted to stay married, and so I never quite made the grade. But we knew each other, and we both, our favorite rivers for both of us was the Thompson River, the Great Thompson River in British Columbia, one of the world's greatest steelhead rivers at that time. And Jack always fished one stretch of the river, a long, quarter-mile long run called the Graveyard, right on a hill, or just down from a hill where there actually is a graveyard. And one day in November, it was just the two of us fishing all day long. We just fished the Graveyard. I'd lead him down the river. He'd be a couple hundred yards above me, and then I'd get out at the tail out, walk past him, and get up at the head, and we'd just sort of cycle like that. And so every hour or so, we'd stand on the bank and talk for a few minutes. And I went down towards the tail out, and I had a little pull. I had a little pull, which I thought was a steelhead. And I walked back up, and I told Jack, I said, I think I had a tug, Jack. I think, and he said, all right, and he went on down. I went on up above, and sure enough, he caught that steelhead. I could see it jumping. And so I walked all the way down there, and I tailed it for him, helped him land it. And we admired it and let it go, and it was a good fish, 15 or 16-pound hen, which is just a fabulous steelhead. Just an average size for that river, really. But I had never mentioned his, father in his presence. I figured, he was famous for saying himself, I spent the first half of my life as the son of a famous man, and the second half as the father of famous daughters. But this time, and I had a bottle of schnapps, or a flask of hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps in it, in honor of my own father. And I said, do you think your dad would have liked this fishing? Sort of by which I meant, lucky to get a strike once a week, and you survived, or you didn't fall in the river. A good day is a river day. You didn't fall into the river.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, really, it's a dangerous river. And the first thing he said was, well, Papa, he always called him Papa. He said, Papa liked to say that all true stories end in death. I think he would have liked the idea of fishing in a graveyard. Wow. But then he said more seriously that his father had lost all interest in fly fishing in freshwater anyway. In 1940, when a steamer trunk carrying all his fishing gear was lost in transit from Florida to Ketchum, Idaho, where Ernest was a guest of the Sun Valley Lodge, probably stolen, and that was from Railway Express, from the train. And so he told me that story, and I didn't think much about it for the next 30 years. And then I live in Montana now, and my wife was going to write a story about searching for Hemingway in Yellowstone country, about the 5 long summers and falls that Ernest Hemingway stayed at the Elbar T. Guest Ranch just outside Cook City at the northeast entrance of Yellowstone Park. And I went down and helped her research the piece she was writing, and she said, well, you should try to incorporate some of this into one of your books. And I remember, well, I've got this story, I used to fish with Jack, and he told me about Ernest's missing tackle. And anyway, Jack had died, but I tracked down Ernest Hemingway's second son, Patrick. And Patrick said, oh, yes, he remembered that quite well. And he said his dad was not very good with arithmetic. And so each year they'd get the Hardy catalog from London, and he'd help his dad calculate pound sterling into American dollars. And so to his knowledge, there was all his father's fishing tackle was in that steamer trunk. But what else was in it, who knew? So I thought, I can sort of use that as a springboard to write a story about what happened to that steamer trunk. And so I did, and that was that's my book called Cold Hearted River.
And is that kind of based off the Two-Hearted River, that the name of that one at all, or? Well,
just in the for alliteration, I call it a Cold-Hearted River. Yes, because Hemingway wrote a story called Big Two-Hearted River,
right?
Which is actually the Fox River. The Big Two-Hearted River never was much of a trout stream by comparison to the Fox.
Now, you spent quite a bit of time in Michigan, didn't you?
Well, I grew up in Michigan partly. My father was a locomotive engineer for the Pennsylvania Railroad in southeast Ohio, and he would take 6 weeks vacation every summer, and we would camp on the banks of the AuSable River in Michigan. And we would camp at Burton's Landing, which was the uppermost limit of the first fly fishing only stretch of trout stream in the United States, to my knowledge. And by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, I tied flies for all the old fishermen who would come to that campground. And back then, fly fishing, there was a lot of voodoo. It's not like our, scientific knowledge we have today of entomology. Mason Bradley, I remember he caught a trout that had a vole in it, and so he wouldn't eat it. He had his daughters would eat it and his wife, but not him. So he wanted me to tie a fly that looked like a mountain vole, or not a mountain vole, but a vole. And then another guy we called the German because he was from Germany and had fought in World War II, for the Germans.
Uh-huh.
He would drink martinis out of a mason jar, I remember. And he had caught a trout at a place called the Castle in the Mason Tract on the south branch of the Au and it had a couple feathers inside of it. So he wanted me to tie a fly to resemble a baby grouse, which I did by, just lashing feathers onto a wine cork. And so I would do that, and I would have a place I called the Wishing Tree, which was a tree there at Burton Landing, and I would encourage fishermen, because I tied flies for them, that if they caught a good, fish on a fly, to sacrifice that fly, and we would put it in the bark, put it and we call it the Wishing Tree. And so by the end of the summer, I might have 18, 19, 20 flies, there, and I'd just leave them there, and then the next summer we'd come up, and they'd almost all be, rotted away. And I did that year after year after year, and finally wrote a story for Field and Stream called The Wishing Tree just a couple of years ago about growing up there. And then later, when I was in college, it was at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, I spent my summers working for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources for a man named Bill Buck, who was spearheading a project to rebuild trout habitat in the Au Sable and Manistee rivers, because the heavy recreational canoe traffic would knock out the cedar sweepers that gave cover to the trout.
Sure.
And so we would build stump jams and islands, and there's an island that's more than 60 feet long that Bill calls the Masterpiece, which I built back in 1973 or 74, and it's still there. It's got trees growing on it now, and I hadn't seen Bill. He's an old fighter pilot. I hadn't seen him for years and years and years and years. He was my boss, and then he found out I wrote these books and got in touch with me and told me if I ever came back to Michigan, he'd float me down the holy water stretch of the Au Sable in a Au Sable river boat, and so that's what I did a couple of years ago. I had to come back to do I was a speaker at a book festival in Harbor Springs. Anyway, so I have a strong connection, to Michigan. I still love Michigan. But one of the weird things was, we only fished at night. We fished during the great Hexagenia mayfly hatch at night, and then if the mayflies hatch was over, we'd just fish with mouse flies or streamer flies or whatever. And when I moved to Montana, I couldn't believe that people out here actually fished in the daytime and expected to catch fish. We would never dream of fishing in the daytime.
That's right. Yeah, our infamous Hex hatch every year. I went up north last year with a guide, and I've mentioned him so many times on this podcast because he's just done so much for me. Brian Kosminski with True North Trout took me up for my first time fishing Hex, and it was just an amazing experience being on the water.
Where did you go?
Up on the on the Jordan, actually, on the Jordan.
No, I fished the Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a great time. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, it is a very unique experience in Michigan, mousing at night and fishing Hex and fishing all of those things. I mean, it's a unique thing, and I don't think everyone knows about the Hex hatch here and whatnot, but it is an amazing experience.
It was even popular, back in the early 1960s when I was going to Michigan. I started going to Michigan in 1953, but when I started fishing there would be a lot of fishermen come up from Detroit and Grand Rapids and the larger cities, but you could still find a lot of water. Today it's quite popular, but I remember I fished on the Maple River once for the Hex hatch, and I could hear, you're casting by sound, and I could hear fish working, and I couldn't figure out why the hell, I couldn't get them to take, and I did finally catch him, and what I found out was the river made like an oxbow bend, and I was actually casting over a little isthmus of land, or I was casting, or he was actually rising on over a little piece of land. And I finally figured that out, and I got in a better position so I could cast over the little bit of land, and I got him.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's just a great story, but that's just an amazing hatch and just an incredible thing to experience. Now you said you studied for your master's there at University of Michigan, U of M, huh?
I did, yes. Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, I want to bring it back. Excuse me, I'm looking at my notes, so sorry about if it's kind of a weird question.
Well, go ahead, yeah. I was saying, when I left U of M, I went and was a crime reporter in California, Bakersfield, California.
You had mentioned that. One of the things that I wanted to bring up to you that you had mentioned, you were on the water fishing, and that fishing was steelhead with Hemingway's son, and you said you always carried some hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps to honor your father.
Mm-hmm.
Did you fly fish a lot with your father?
Oh, yeah. That's the only reason, that's the whole reason I became involved. Now, he had no, mentors himself. His family, there were no fishermen. So he just grew up, reading Field and Stream magazine and other magazines and wanted to fish, wanted to learn how to fish. And so he, where we lived in southeastern Ohio and basically in Appalachia, there were a lot of smallmouth bass in the creeks. We called them cricks. We were so sophisticated. And so that's what my dad did, and then eventually he found his way north into Michigan and would camp on the Au Sable and fish for trout. So I grew up, fishing the creeks for smallmouth bass and fishing for bluegills in the lakes, and, you take what's available.
And the reason I ask you about that question, Keith, the reason I asked you that question about your dad was because it's something about this fly fishing thing where we are a nostalgic and I want to say romantic group of people. Mm-hmm. We do things like honoring our fathers with peppermint schnapps. We do these things that a lot of people who fish with spinning gear don't do. I wrote stories about him that were like finalists for a National Magazine Award. About fishing with my son and then also fishing with my father, and and he was most the most fun to be around when he was fishing. Not that he wasn't at other times, but he had a hard time communicating sometimes. He was one of those strong, silent World War II veterans, and he notably changed and was calmer and when he was on the river. And so that's what I really remember of him the most. I can remember him, we'd be camped on the Au Sable in a tent, and we'd have a little fire, and my mom and my little brother and me would sit there, and my dad would put on his waders and have us, go around his head with 612, mosquito repellent, and then he'd walk off. I can remember him just walking off into the night to fish. You'd see his headlight bobbing away, and then he'd come back at 12 or 1 in the morning, and if I was awake or woke up, I would, come out and see the trout, that he caught, and then we'd eat them the next morning for breakfast. So that was a wonderful tradition that we did for, I would say, 20 years or more. Wow. That
and then later, like I told you, I ended up living on the river and, building the trout habitat.
Do you find a lot of inspiration for your own writing? I mean, when you go out there, obviously they're based around fly fishing and camping and all that, but the ideas and the stories that you have, do you find when you're out there fishing, is that when you feel the most inspired and most creative?
I don't know. I used to say I went to the river to think, and then later I changed that I went to the river so I didn't have to think, because I would get absorbed enough that I wouldn't think of all the other problems I had. Or I do a weird thing. I put a notebook in one sock and a pen in the other, and I run. I'm a runner. I've been a runner all my life. And when I run, that's when I think of things. And I'll stop, good excuse to stop, and I'll write down what I thought of, and on an envelope or half of a little notepad, and so my drawers are just littered with them. So I think that's when I think about what I'm writing the most. When I'm actually fishing, I think I go there not to get away from it, but just to go to that other world. Which has, meant so much to me for so many years now. Geez, I've been doing this since I was a wee little kid. the casting and fishing part,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what's next for you? Are you going to write another novel? You have anything coming out soon?
Well, I've got another Sean Stranahan novel. I've written, so this is my 8th, and that will be published July 4th next summer. And I intend to keep doing the series, but I am also working on a book about kids growing up in Appalachia, where I did, which really life hasn't changed there in the last 60 years in many ways.
Wow.
They've just traded, moonshine for methamphetamine and prescription drugs. So it was a really hard place to grow up. I grew up in an area where I think there was like 33% adult illiteracy.
Wow.
Close to where I was. It was strange. I grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, but you go over one ridge. It was very corrugated, very mountainous country south of there, and you'd drop in, and there'd be a little town, like 3 or 4 buildings and a little steeple, and maybe even something like a precursor to a bed and breakfast, and then you climb another ridge and you drop down in, and it would be deliverance country, dead chickens in the creek country.
Yeah.
And it's got, if anything, it's gotten worse.
Wow.
So my dad once told me, he'd do anything he could for me as long as I left. And I used to work in the steel mills there too. So anyway, I'm glad I got out of there.
Yeah.
But you make do with what you've got. And I had a little creek, I call it a creek, and I would catch snakes there and fish for smallmouth bass. Everything goes back to snakes. That was my first love. And by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I could name all 230 so species of snakes in North America and knew the Latin names for a lot of them.
Wow.
And so to me, I think why I started writing, and in a way fishing, is a sort of a search for the truth. Because where I grew up, those country people were very steeped in superstitions. And so they didn't know anything at all about snakes. And as a wee little kid, I realized that adults were not infallible. They were prejudiced. They could be mean-spirited about snakes. It was very strange. Parents wouldn't let their kids play with me because they knew I had snakes. My grandmother Nanol would stuff towels under all the doors because she was afraid the snake would come get her. And so I, trying to learn about snakes was like searching for the truth about that. And then later, my mom got me the complete Sherlock Holmes. And so those Sherlock Holmes stories, again, that was like a search for the truth. And then even years later, Man-Eaters of Kuman that I read, Jim Corbett's stories of man-eating tigers, that too was searching for the truth and following tracks, and that's what I always wanted to do. So I started writing mystery novels, and that's what a mystery novel is, a search for the truth.
Are you still? Do you still feel like you're searching for the truth, Keith?
Oh yeah. The more the older you get, the more you realize what you don't know. I think that's very true. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I want the books to be more than just, a mystery book, this lighthearted. I want the, I'm a seat of the pants kind of writer. I generally have a first scene, and sometimes I have a last scene, and if I'm lucky, I have a backdrop issue, like Whirling Disease and Royal Wulff Murders, or Wolves in Dead Man's Fancy, or Mining in A Death in Eden. So I like to paint a picture, like write a human story against the backdrop of a larger issue like that. But I don't think it out. I just sort of do it. And a lot of times what my experience writing for Field and Stream magazine is a big help. Like the first chapter of one of my books, I have a man and a woman who become lost in a blizzard and end up shooting each other's horses, or almost. Well, that was a story that I collected many years ago and thought, if I ever write a book, I want this story, because two hunters in southern Wyoming, or maybe it was southern Idaho, I can't recall, and they had got caught in a whiteout, and they decided the only way to survive was to shoot their horses and crawl inside. And they couldn't do that, so they shot each other's horses and crawled inside, and they survived the night, and when the morning came and it got light, they could see their truck. That's how close they were.
Wow.
The one guy wouldn't even, he said, I just can't talk about it. But the other guy talked about it. And so I'll later, then I'll incorporate that into a book. Or a guy I worked with at the Bakersfield, California newspaper told us a story of a couple in their 40s, professional people, like a doctor and a lawyer. In other words, people who should know better,
right,
who were having an argument. This is just a few blocks from where I lived. And the woman tried to confront the man at the door to the house, and he wouldn't open the door, so she tried to crawl down the chimney. Well, he was out of town, and by the time he came back to town, he could hear something dripping from the chimney, and she was dead. And that was a big story in California, and I thought, well, I'll use that someday.
Yeah.
So I used a derivation of that, something different, to begin my book, Crazy Mountain Kiss, with.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah.
Well, my question for you, and normally these interviews don't go too long, so I appreciate you taking a little time for me. But
sure.
I would like to go back to that search for the truth, because if I'm not assuming you've ever listened to this podcast, but that's my goal. Is we don't talk, as you notice, I'm not talking about gear or how to field dress your deer or anything like that. We are more of Hemingway feelings. What is the culture? And I'm a songwriter as well, and I write music. I did an album called Songs About Fly Fishing, and I've taught. And we had a series called Musicians on the Fly, and I've talked to a lot of writers. And the thing is that's consistent about writers is they're always questioning things. They're always looking for the truth. And if things don't make sense, we ask questions and we piss a lot of people off. Or like you said, you knew when you were a kid before 5 years old that adults were they don't know everything because of this thing with snakes, Not everyone is born that way. Not every 5-year-old is thinking, wow, my parents or these adults don't know everything. That is a very unique thing. And
that was I think, that was before kids rebel at an age where you think parents are parents are not just parents, but adults in general, infallible. And I grew up finding that was exactly the opposite. With the exception of my own father, he was not afraid of snakes and taught me a tiny bit. He didn't know much, but all he had to do was hand me the first snake, and the course of my life was set. I ended up traveling the world looking for snakes.
Wow.
Even when I fished for Masir in India for Field and Stream magazine and followed Jim Corbett's steps where he hunted the thack and Chuka man-eaters, I was still looking for snakes. And I remember finding about a 10-foot Indian python. It was in an old temple, an old stone temple. And there were, it was a place where tourists went. And I realized, at any other place in the world, I would have tried to catch that snake and hopefully not get bit, because those big pythons, they hurt like hell when they bite you. And he was big enough to have killed a small person, but I would have done what I had to get him out of there, because I knew somebody'd come kill him. Mm-hmm. But in India, that could be your grandmother, if you're a Hindu. And so he would never be harmed, in rural India like that. So luckily I didn't have to pick him up and get bitten. I've been bitten at least, 2,000 times by snakes. Luckily not by venomous species.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time in India as well, and that is a different world altogether. I mean, you get off the plane and you realize how small of a world you've been living in your entire life.
Oh, yeah. You get off the plane in Delhi, and the first thing that faces you is the muzzle of a gun.
Yeah.
And you see all kinds of stuff. I mean, I saw in a 7.5-hour drive, my photographer and I saw 4 people killed. Not dead, but we saw them killed.
Wow.
Right in front of us. All road fatalities, and it's like there were camels on the road, an elephant, bicycle rickshaws, motor rickshaws, trucks, buses, everything in between, vehicles that ran on washing machine engines, and everybody would have a sign on the back of the, back saying, "Horn, please," meaning, if you come up, beep your horn so I know you're there.
Right.
And we had no sooner left Delhi than we got caught in a so-called traffic jam, and our driver just backed up, weaving between cars, went over a divider, drove into oncoming traffic for miles, and then jumped back over the berm and continued on. And my photographer, who had grown up in South Africa and the Philippines, who thought he'd seen everything, he looked at me and he said, "Now I know why Hindus are fatalists."
Yeah, it is a unique experience, and I saw people like, with cobras and playing the violent flute or whatever, with these king cobras, and the elephants, and just like a major thoroughfare, there's just a random elephant, it was just, and the smells, I flew into Delhi as well, and I will never forget that feeling when I got off the plane, because we laid over, I think it was in Germany, and then we flew into Delhi. And I remember, like, when we landed and I got off the plane, I'm like, it feels like you're on another planet. It really does.
Another planet, yeah.
Yeah.
Another world entirely.
Yeah. And we went to
some of the smells are very good.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't, and I kept asking Sid Anand, who was an Indian guide that was with us, "What's that smell, Sid? What's that smell?" He said, "Well, I don't know, curry leaves," or he couldn't figure it out. Later, I thought, "Oh, no, I think it's just the way my skin reacts with malaria medication." So your skin that smells a certain way.
Yeah.
Here I was searching for something. I'm not so sure.
Again, searching for the truth. The last question for you. Always searching for something, Has your journey for the truth, you talk about how you search for the truth. As you look back on your life, Keith, I mean, I'll be 40 here in a few months. You've got a few years on me. When you look back
on that many, yeah, I do.
A couple of years. When you look back on your life, has that search and has that search for the truth been a blessing, or would you call it a curse sometimes?
Well, nobody's ever asked me that question before. Well, I think it's a blessing, because if you're complacent, well, then sort of your life as a questing human being is over. I study ancient man, and I've done a lot of solo backpack elk hunting, and a lot of solo steelhead trips where I hiked or bicycled miles and miles, and I need to be alone like that, and part of it is to sort of revisit what made you who you are. I find, it's like you looking at the reflection of water, and then if you bring your face close enough to it, you can see through the surface and see down to the bottom, and I think you see your face, and you can the years just go away, and you can actually see yourself as a child and as a young man, and what made you what you are today. And so I always like to touch base with that. And that means to me that if I take 2 steelhead fishing trips a year, I'll often take one just by myself, because I want to be alone. But then again, as you know, fly fishing is, it's a movable sport, and it's also a sport that's very instrumental in making friends. And I find that if you fish by yourself, you meet people on the river. And most of my best fishing friends I met on the river when I was fishing alone. If you go with somebody, then that's who you fish with, and you don't meet anybody else. But if you're alone, you meet other people. And so I think that's very important as well, for me anyway.
Yeah, I sometimes look at other people that don't ever ask questions, and they're not really always pursuing or seeking that truth or their truth or whatever, and I sometimes envy them, because sometimes I just don't have peace. Sometimes I'm wrestling with things, or wrestling with questions, or searching for that truth, and sometimes people can just turn it off and I have a friend who's an auto mechanic, and he's a dang good auto mechanic, and he never questions. He just every day he just goes to work, comes home, everything's great. And I wish sometimes I envy that. I envy that stable mind. I don't know how else to say it, but yet
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking if that was a blessing or a curse, or if you ever saw it that way. That's where that question came from.
Oh, okay. Well, the curse, of course, is that that's part of being a writer, and as a writer, you don't make a lot of money.
That's the curse, right?
Be a better, it might be more of a blessing if
Well, Keith, thank you so much for hanging out with me.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
I could talk with you all day. No doubt. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. If people wanted to get a hold of you or check out your writing, obviously we'll put some links in the show notes. But where would they contact you?
I will. I'll be updating my website here this week, because I just now got the publication date and the cover for the new book. Great. So people can always contact me through my website, which is just KeithMcCafferty.com. And then I also have an author page on Facebook, which is just Keith McCafferty. There's a Keith A. McCafferty, which is just my personal, and then there's just a regular Keith McCafferty, which is my so-called author page. And you can put in, my Gmail address, just keith.mccafferty@gmail.com. And one thing I do is everybody who writes to me or gets in touch, I get in touch with, I write back to everyone, and I'll ask them where they live and where they fish if they're fishermen, and then I'll send them a postcard. And so I do a lot of my fly fishing through my readers now. They get out. I don't. All I do is work. They're the ones that get out and fish. Or hunt or whatever.
Well, we'll be sure to put all those contact information in the show notes. Good luck with your new book.
Sure.
And we really appreciate your time, Keith. Bill, it's really great to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
It was really weird without you. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I felt the Thanksgiving episode I didn't even tell you I was doing it, because I want to tell you things.
Oh, I did hear that one.
Aw, but I can go at that by myself, no problem. But like an actual episode, that was really tough, man.
The banter was rough, I imagine.
The banter was rough. Although I do talk to myself. I think I did a 20-minute intro.
Holy cow.
Yeah, just running my hack about different things, But anyways.
And I will check it out. Probably not this week, because my week's crazy.
That's what our guests say. Hey, have you ever heard of us? Oh, what is it? It's a podcast.
I'll check it out.
Oh, yeah. I think I've listened to that once. Just kidding. But thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Bill and I from the podcast studio here wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas.
Indeed.
Happy New Year.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Merry Hanukkah.
Happy Festivus.
I can't think of another one. What's another? Rosh Hashanah, but that's Hanukkah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Kwanzaa, Hanukkah. We got them all. New Year's, Merry Christmas.
President's Day's coming up, right?
President's Day.
We'll do that in February.
Yeah, but until next time, go fishing.